All right, I'd like to talk to you this time about the second sexual vulnerability that we have as men. And it's a little bit different than the first vulnerability, because the first vulnerability has more to do with kind of what you do to defend yourself, okay? The second one, has more to do with your relationships and your heart, okay? So the first one, you're trying to get your physical eyes and your mind in control, and now you want to get your heart and relationships under control. The first vulnerability has more to do with what you do, okay? Do you bounce your eyes? Do you starve your mind of lust? Okay, the second vulnerability has more to do with how you connect, or if you're connecting, okay? Because actually our sexuality is tied very closely to our heart and our emotions. And I'm going to explain to you how that works in a little bit. But before I do that, I'd like to just share a couple of stories, because I think the stories will help you get a picture as to how this vulnerability works. First of all, I'll start with my own. Okay, so you've heard my story about getting my eyes and my mind under control and putting the defenses up on the eyes and the mind. And one of the things that happened to me was I got really confused after that. I mean, at first, everything was going great. I was getting more and more pure. Even my dream life was becoming pure, because I wasn't looking at girls during the day. I wasn't thinking about girls during the day. So, my brain subconsciously didn't even have that in my head to make dreams out of, really. And so I was just feeling really good, but there was one thing that continued to happen, okay? And that's some masturbation continued in my life. And it was confusing to me at first, because a lot of my masturbation was fueled by things like, looking at lingerie ads and lusting, or, looking at some babe at a swimming pool for too long, whatever, and I'd think about her later and get all, hot, whatever. But this wasn't seeming to be fueled by that. And I started to look at my life, and I'm looking at myself and going, okay, I've got this great sex life. I've got a wife that I love. I'm not looking at a bunch of rotten stuff. I'm no longer looking at the exercise shows. I'm not looking at the R-rated movies. So what's driving the masturbation that remains? I was thinking at the time it's probably 85% pure, but this other 15%, I wasn't sure what was really going on. And I started to kind of look at my life to kind of see where maybe there was something that was falling down. Well, see, at the time, I was a salesman, and I was basically starting my own business, and I was on full commission sales. Now, what full commission sales means when you have little children is if you don't sell something, your kids don't eat. And that's huge pressure. And I was under a lot of pressure. I was looking at my life and noticing that, I would a lot of times tuck my wife into bed, tuck the kids into bed, give them kisses, head off to the office. And at night, late, I would be putting together sales proposals, different kinds of things to go out the next day in order to try again to sell more. And one of the things I realized was that a lot of that masturbation was happening there, all right? I'd be away from home, which makes sense because, your wife's not going to be there, but there was something more to it. I just felt like I began to look at when it happened, and I began to see that there was a stress issue involved, where if I was particularly stressed trying to sell stuff, or I'm feeling a little bit like, oh man, business, I really need to get it going, and I'm not sure I'm going to have enough money this month, whatever, I was finding that I would masturbate to relieve the stress, which at the time I wasn't really clear why that worked that way. But I began to look at it, and I realized that instead of taking my stress to the Lord, I was taking my stress essentially, literally, into my own hands, and kind of relieving my stress myself. And I wasn't really trusting God for the success of my business. I wasn't trusting God for even me. You see, I had grown up not really quite sure that I was truly a man capable of making it in a man's world. And here I was struggling, just barely kind of getting by, wondering if I'd make it or not. And that stress of not really understanding where I fit, whether I had what it took, it created that stress, and it ended up in masturbation in my life. And As soon as I understood the connection, I always thought up until that time that masturbation was always a direct result from looking at things you shouldn't look at and then getting your engines going too high and then ending up masturbating. As soon as I understood that there's a second issue involved here, I was able to see, okay, you know what? This sexual sin isn't really all that sexual. I'm using my sexual apparatus, okay, but it really doesn't have anything to do with sex because I'm getting all the sex I need at home. It had everything to do with stress and not trusting God, okay? Let me share you another story because it's very, very similar. And I share two stories with you just so you can really get a hang of what I'm talking about. I have a good friend at my church, and he's kind of a newer friend. He's just moved to Iowa from Washington, and he has started a new business, all right? And when he came here, he had his sexual purity in line. His wonderful wife, a couple of kids, just an awesome guy, awesome Christian guy. And he had not been struggling with sexual sin at all. And so he comes here and he starts a new business, and he's in construction, okay? So obviously there's a lot of construction work in the summer, but then sometimes in the winter that kind of dwindles down. Now what he had decided to do was he bought this really nice pickup truck with a really nice plow in the front. And for those of us that live in the Midwestern states, those sorts of things, there's a lot of snow in the winter. And guess what? When the snow falls, somebody has to remove it so business can go on. Well, so he had bought this truck, bought this big plow, was all set. And then for the first time in all my days, I'd never seen this in Iowa before, there was no snow from January through April. None. Okay? None. It's a drought. And that's just the way it was. So he's got all these expenses of buying the plow, buying the truck, no construction work going on because it's really his first year in construction. His name hadn't even been going around much, so didn't have any people saying, hey, you should go see him. He's a really good builder. I mean, he just had no way of getting leads or business. So he was really counting on the snowfall, and it never came. So sometime in March, April, I got a call from him out of the blue, and he said, Fred, I am really struggling all of a sudden with pornography. And I'm just inside, I'm just going, you? I couldn't believe it. And so we got together, and he started telling me that he found that he would be, putting his wife to bed. He'd maybe go into his office, which was in his home, and maybe do a little invoicing or whatever, but he would end up on the computer looking at porn and masturbating and all that. And as he was just telling me that story, and I'm thinking, and he's saying, I haven't been watching R-rated movies. I've got my eyes under control. This whole thing is confusing to me. And so I looked at him and I said, well, how's your business going? Because at this time I didn't know anything about the drought and the snow or anything like that. And he told me later when I asked him that question, he's like, Fred, I just told you about this sexual sin problem. I need help, and you're asking me about my business? What are you doing? Okay, so, but I said, well, tell me what's going on in your business. And he said, that's a mess. And he went through the whole story about how he had bought the plow and the drought, and how he only had like about 2 weeks worth of cash, and he didn't know how he was going to feed his family at all. And so I just looked at him and said, have you ever considered the fact that this is not a sexual sin issue? This is a financial trust issue. And then he later told me that he was really mad at me then. It's like, you're a kook. And then he thought, nah, you've written books. So he said, I guess I better listen to what you have to say. And so I began to explain to him how the male body can be used by us when we're in stress, when we are disconnected, when we're feeling lonely, to kind of break that pattern and to feel more connected and to have that kind of emotional relief. And I said, the real issue here is not, that you're some kind of a pervert looking at porn. I mean, you're not a pervert. I know you, okay? The issue here is you don't trust God for your finances. And he just said, well, you're right, I don't trust God for my finances. As a matter of fact, I've never trusted God for my finances. I always feel like I need to be the one that handles my work and pulls myself up by the bootstraps, and I go out and get it done. And I said, well, that's nice, and that's what men do and all that, but in this particular case, you need to connect with God in a new way, because your issue here is not that you are sexually loose or running around looking at the wrong things. Your issue is you don't trust God, and you need to, instead of running to porn to take the stress off your shoulders, you need to run to God. A few weeks later, I asked him, how are you doing? He said, perfect. He said, as soon as I realized that this wasn't a sexual sin issue, really, it was a stress issue, I've been going to God in prayer. I've been spending a lot more time in personal one-on-one worship with God. And, the finances are still hard, but I'm trusting him. And so I don't need the sexual sin. I don't need the relief that comes from that. Isn't that amazing? See, most of us, in fact, I heard Sean Hannity on the radio yesterday. I guess he had an article in Playboy, and somebody was complaining to him about it. You're Mr. Right and True, and why do you have an article in Playboy? Well, in the talk afterwards, where he's trying to defend himself, he said, well, I don't believe in people that, I think people that read that are perverts, and they need to get a life. That is just such a ridiculous understanding of sexual sin in men. It is not an issue of being a pervert. We've already seen that the way the human eye is made, you can get locked into that addictionally if you're looking at what you don't look at. And then as I begin to talk to you about this second vulnerability, you're going to see it has nothing to do with being a pervert at all. It's a trust issue. It's a disconnection issue. And I want to explain to you how our sexual sin can be rooted in our interpersonal issues that have nothing to do with intercourse or romance or anything else. Let me start by saying this. Male sexuality is really tightly connected to the passing of intimacy in our lives, okay? It is our natural language, our mother tongue, when it comes to passing intimacy with another person, all right? And so when we fall in love with a girl, we have a girlfriend, we have a wife, our most natural thing, the most natural way we want to express our intimacy and to pass intimacy is sexually, either through intercourse or through the things that kind of surround intercourse. Now, for women, it's just completely different. They can pass intimacy in 1,000 ways. Talking, sharing, hugging, going to the mall, buying an ice cream cone. There's 1,000 ways. If I want to express my love to Brenda, I'm not going to say, let's go buy an ice cream cone and sit and look in each other's eyes. That's not my native tongue. Now, I might do that, okay, but then I'm expecting something more later, so to say, where I can really express my love. And men tend to be, our natural language is right there. It's not like we can't learn another language. I've learned through the years how to really draw intimacy and pass intimacy with Brenda in other ways. But my natural language is still sexual, and when I find her, when I really want to connect with her, that's how I want to do it, okay? And it's really important for us to understand that that's very central to who we are, okay? The trouble is that all of the body's most powerful chemicals are tied in to orgasm, and it's tied in to sex. Okay, so it's very easy for men to confuse real sex and false sex, like masturbation, with true intimacy, okay? So when you think about what I said before about how, dopamine, which is involved in the pleasure centers of the brain during sex, is 30 times stronger than cocaine. You can begin to understand the kind of feeling of release and the feeling of pleasure that an orgasm can bring. And it's so easy for us to confuse the passage of true intimacy with just the feelings that we experience during premarital sex or even porn and masturbation, all right? So the bottom line is this: the pleasure chemicals involved in porn and masturbation become a seductively powerful substitute for true intimacy being passed. And let me just kind of go through it, okay? First of all, an orgasm produces a very strong sense of manhood in a guy. I don't know, I've noticed it many times. I pay attention to these things, I guess. I have an orgasm, I just feel like a man, you know? And there's that feeling of dominance, that strong dominance at the moment of release. It's a fleeting thing, but it's there. Second, I feel a very strong sense of intimate connection when I have an orgasm with another human being, even if it's with a picture. Okay, there's a feeling of intimacy at the time of orgasm. And the thing you need to remember, that for a stressed man or a lonely and disconnected man, that sense of manhood, okay, proving I do have what it takes maybe, all right, that intimate connection, proving I'm not alone, okay, that can be an extremely potent draw, even for a married guy. Okay, and what a guy can't get through real sexual encounters, he believes he can get through looking at porn and the masturbation, because it feels like intimacy. Why does it feel like intimacy? Because our natural language of passing intimacy is so tightly related to sex. All right? Does that make sense? You tracking a little bit on this? And it feels like manhood. Because our native language of intimacy is sexual, listen to this, masturbation feels like intimacy to us, and it can become like a easily obtained feel-good drug. All right? And let me explain what it was like for me in high school, okay? If life was going badly and I was depressed, okay, maybe it looked like I might get demoted from a starting position or whatever it might be, I might masturbate to feel better. Okay? If life was going good, we won the big inner city game, I might masturbate to celebrate. If I were stressed heavily for a time, like say finals week, all right, I might masturbate to relax and sort of reassert control of my life, because I felt like everything's out of control and I can control this, all right? And it isn't long before self-stimulation becomes kind of that medicating drug for the pain that you feel in your life. And masturbation is a far easier thing to obtain than cocaine or any other kind of drug. You don't even have to go anywhere. And a real-time orgasm, even if you're by yourself, feels like intimacy, even though you're by yourself, if only for a moment. Okay, now, how does this vulnerability work in Satan's hands? Well, all he has to do is get you lonely and disconnected. All he has to do is get you stressed and not trusting God, and he's got you, okay? Because most of us, sometime, somewhere, when we masturbate, if we ever masturbate, we begin to find out, yeah, this feels good and this releases stress, and it becomes something that you remember and you can go back and get. Now, this kind of sexual sin, it can come, like I said, from stress, financial stress, not trusting God. It also can be coming from wounds in your life, emotional wounds from your background. Wounds, just like isolation, just like stress, it's a wide open door to this kind of a trap. Let me just talk about my own life. My dad landed a bunch of father wounds in my life. I mean, it hurt. And, you know, my dad, he used to come to all my football practices, and he would stand on the sidelines and he would rip me for any mistake I would make, okay? And he would be yelling things like, "Get your head up," if I maybe throw an interception and kind of hung my head and shook my head, or "Get your head out of your," and we all know what the next word is. And, you know, it was just constant pressure to the point where my teammates would actually come back into the huddle and they would say, "You know, Fred, we don't know how to say this, we hate your dad, okay? We see what he's doing to you, and we just feel bad," okay? And so, you know, there was a lot of pressure, and I never really measured up to my dad. My dad was a national wrestling champion and heavyweight, and, you know, when I say my dad could beat up your dad, he could. You know, I mean, he could beat up any dad. He was Superman, and he wanted me in the worst way to follow in his footsteps. Well, I wrestled from 2nd through 9th grade, but I just didn't like it, and I finally quit. And I don't know that he ever really forgave me for that. I mean, I remember 1 year before he died, he was saying that that was one of the big disappointments of his life, that I never kept up with wrestling. And, you know, there was always this thing of, you know, I could be all city, all conference, all state, wouldn't matter. I still didn't measure up to him. And in spite of the respect I got around school from my coaches and from my teammates, from the girls in the school, I can assure you, okay, I never felt like I measured up like a man, ever, because Dad didn't say I measured up as a man. And you see, with the kind of society we're living in, where there's so many father wounds around, where 50% divorce rates have left us with so many fatherless guys, okay, this is an issue that a lot of us have struggled with. And wounds like this form a hole in our hearts. Okay, Dad wounded me, and guess what? He left me lonely and aching. He's around at my practices, but that's about it. Do you remember the primary way that guys give and receive intimacy? The acts just prior to and during intercourse. What can give guys that feeling of intimacy, that feeling of love and acceptance that you're not getting from your parents? Right again, the always smiling, always available, always unclothed girls of cyberspace. I mean, and they never reject you, they never turn away, they don't expect anything from you, and there you end up in that position where you can use them for that kind of connection. Now, without that connection with our fathers and acceptance as men, we're kind of guaranteed, again, to fall into sexual sin. That's part of it, and that's why we see so much of it today. Let me read this email from Derek. I've been a Christian all my life, and I had no problem with sexual sin until my parents divorced 2 years ago when I was 17. Okay, so he's had no problem with sexual sin. I was upset. For some reason, I started up with some mild porn and masturbation. It felt good. But now it's gotten steadily worse, and I don't know what to do. Okay, so he's never had a problem. He gets really upset by the stress of this divorce. He starts up with a little that, feels good, starts to give him some relief, but then of course it's addictive and it gets steadily worse, and now he doesn't know what to do. I have heard so many stories like this through the years after I've written my books. I mean, sin flourishes in the wake, sexual sin especially, in the wake of broken family relationships. Okay, the average dad spends about 40 seconds a day in meaningful conversation with his kids across America. 40 seconds. That study has been done 3 decades in a row, and it always ends up right around 40 seconds. Okay, with 40 seconds of meaningful conversation, how much connection do young men have with their dads? None. 80 to 90% of the young men I talk to as I go around speaking at youth events and stuff, I'll ask them things like, well, what's your relationship with your dad like? I mean, it's always rolled eyes, angry clouds come over their face. I'm sure you've seen that as well. And the thing is, when you talk to them and you see their faces, you recognize where the struggles are coming from. Yes, they're looking at things they shouldn't look at, but there's a lot of wounds that they're trying to medicate as well. A lot of us, we don't like to think of ourselves as medicating pain. Okay, I'm a man, I don't have wounds. Sorry, if you have sexual sin, you probably do have some wounds in there somewhere. And it's something that we as men need to address and get healed so that we don't have to chase after sexual sin to try to get some kind of relief from those wounds. Now, listen to what a addictions counselor told me about this particular issue and the connections with fathers, okay? This guy's name is Patrick Middleton. I just love the guy. I've talked to him many times. And he said this: I deal with a lot of adult men, and it never fails that the men with the deeper sexual issues also have uninvolved or missing fathers. Their sexual issues are directly and severely impacted by their dad's failures as a father. Now, that's to be expected, okay? Because there's a point in the development of boys into man where they need to make a tighter connection with their fathers during that time frame, all right? And it's usually between 11 and 13. He needs to have that deeper relationship, and this is what Patrick said. Fred, I know this sounds weird, but I've never found a better way to say it. The dad has to be close enough to his son to be able to call the heart of the man out of the son, okay? I talked about my heart, never really knowing I was a man because my dad never said so. See, my dad needed to call that out of me. And what Patrick's saying, that has to happen for all of us. If this does not happen, listen, this is so obvious. The next window of opportunity for a young man to try to feel like a man is what? Through his emerging sexuality, okay? can't find his manhood, dad's not there, doesn't know if he fits in the world of men. So instead he goes into the world of women and begins to show his masculinity through his sexuality. All right. So if dad isn't there early on in adolescence to help answer the questions, the boy will use his sexuality as an arena to answer his questions about being a man. Now, see, if we ask women what the big deal is about pornography, they will always say it's because of that first vulnerability, okay? It's, porn has a draw to men because, the free and frisky women out there. I mean, I've heard Brenda say stuff like that. And, the male eyes and mind and all that. But see, those of us who have struggled with sexual sin, we know there's something more to it than that, okay? There's more to it than just the eyes and the mind, because we've been in situations where the stress has driven us to places where we don't want to go. There is a emotional aspect to this sexual sin problem, okay? A vulnerability that we have to recognize. And one of the things is that we as men, we have a tendency to say, okay, I like that first vulnerability. I can get my head around that. I can bounce my eyes, I can starve my mind, I can get the lust out. And it's something that we kind of feel like we can put our hands around. Then when we get into things like wounds and emotions, we tend to start phasing out, our eyes glaze over, and we don't like to deal with that, okay? But we need to understand what's driving these issues, okay? It's not enough to just bounce the eyes and stop looking at porn. I told you about the stress at work, I told you about the wounds, they will drive the issue too. And you need to understand that disconnection and wounds are driving this issue. Genuine intimacy is so powerful to beat this that I just want to talk to you a little bit about it. It's really a lack of genuine intimacy in our lives that can drive us into the direction of sexual sin. And really what masturbation is a false intimacy, that we have this feeling of intimacy, but it's not really genuine. And that's just a counterfeit that we try to get. I have talked to guys about genuine intimacy and the effect that it has upon their sexual sin problem. It's really fascinating to me. I talked to a guy named Bill Wilson, who at the time was head of a Teen Challenge drug center in Omaha a few years ago. And he openly talks about this. It's okay for me to talk about it. He just said that there was a point in his life where he realized that his sexual sin had gotten to the point where it was driving out other relationships in his life. I mean, at the end of a work day, if somebody would invite him out, hey, let's go out to, have something to eat or whatever, he would always say no, because he was in such a hurry to get back home to get the false intimacy from the sexual sin, the porn, in his computer. And he found that he was spending more and more time on the computer chasing that false intimacy and less time with actual people. And so there came a point in his life where he just said, I've got to stop this. And so he made just one simple rule in his life, and he said this: if anyone at any time asks me to do anything, I'm going to say yes. Just going to reverse. Instead of saying no to everything, now he's going to say yes to everything. And he told me literally, he said, Fred, 4 weeks into that, I think he said 2 months into that, I realized I hadn't looked at porn for 4 weeks. Okay? He didn't even have to struggle against the sexual sin. It just went away because he began actually having genuine intimacy in his life with other people that are other Christians, from his Teen Challenge deal. And it was driving away that need for false intimacy. I'll tell you another story, because it doesn't have to be Christians that you're meeting with either. I was talking to this guy who, he was telling me, there was a 7-month period where my sexual sin basically disappeared. And he said, I'm trying to understand why that is. And after he told me the story, I was able to explain it through what I'm talking about now. But he said, there's a 7-month period where all of us, we were juniors on this football team, and we all decided, we're going to win the championship next year. We're going to do whatever we have to do. There's a 7-month window before practice would start again. So these guys all got together, and they began to lift weights every single day together and run in the mornings together and just do everything together. They just committed to this one goal. And he said they got closer and closer as a unit and more intimate. And he realized that once the season was over and they won the championship and all that, suddenly sexual sin issues began to come back. And you see, what had happened during that time was that he had so much genuine intimacy with these guys. They were such a close-knit group that it drove out any need for any false sexual kinds of intimacy. And he was able to be free without even trying. And so we need to understand the power of genuine intimacy in our lives. Now, what happens is that a lot of times we'll say, okay, how do I get that intimacy? And that's what I want to talk about to you a little bit here in a moment. But the most important intimacy that we can have is with our Heavenly Father. Okay? He is the center of intimacy because he's never off at the Caribbean when we need him. He's not out having pizza with your friends and they all left you home, okay? He's always, always there. And I remember a story one time from Michael Brown, the evangelist, and he said this story when he was a young Christian. He was a young single guy. He always needed to have something to do on a Friday night or a Saturday night. And as it would get closer to the weekend, if he didn't have anything set up, he'd start to panic. And he'd say, oh God. He'd start calling people. They'd all say no, no, no. And he said one time the Lord whispered to him, why don't you go out with me? Why don't we just spend the night together? And it never occurred to him. And he said he spent 3-4 hours just worshiping, going through the Word, talking to the Lord. He said it was just not quite romantic, but I mean, almost. And what he was saying was that once he experienced that, he began to not panic when he wasn't going to have someone to be with because he had the Lord there and he could have that kind of connection with him anytime he needed. And there were many nights on weekends that he was able to spend those kind of romantic nights with the Lord and have the genuine intimacy that helped him to grow rather than run in ways that he shouldn't run. So you may be asking yourself, okay, that's good for Michael Brown, but what about me? I mean, God's got to hate me by now. I mean, I'm always saying, Lord, I'm not going to do this, and then I do it, and he must be wanting to squash me like a bug. He has to. Okay? If he has any brains at all, and he's God, of course, he must have brains. So, I mean, you start to feel these things about yourself. You start thinking, I'm a loser. Okay? I'm always looking at porn. I'm always masturbating. I feel so rotten. Okay? What I want to say to you is this. It's really easy for us to imagine God looking at us like that. It's just really easy. I mean, if it weren't for his loving character, he'd be ready to squash us like a bug. Absolutely, okay? It's easy to imagine him being ready to throw his hands up and say, okay, I'm tired of this. I'm done with Fred, okay? It's easy. But you know what? It's not easy for God to imagine doing that. In fact, it's impossible for God to imagine doing that, to see you like that. He can't. It's impossible for him to see that. You see, God called himself Father for a really important reason. He knew it would help us understand who he is and what our relationship with him is like. And he didn't just pick that out of the air and go, oh, this is cool, everybody will think I'm their dad. Okay? It's because he was conveying a message that's really important for us to understand. But sometimes it's hard to understand that because of our own relationships with our earthly dads. I had a rotten relationship with my earthly dad. And, you know, when God comes to me and says, hey, I want to be your father, I just want to go, who needs another one? You know, I'm not sure I want one. And so we need to understand that what he's talking about is not necessarily the kind of thing you had with your dad. Now, I told you a football story in order to convey my father wounds. Now let me tell you another football story to convey the Father's love so you can see the difference. All right. When my son, Michael, the big one, when he was back in 8th grade, he had said to me one day, he said, Dad, will you teach me how to lift weights? I want to play football. I said, oh, the Holy Grail. I have a child that's asked me to play sports. I mean, I was just like dying. I said, absolutely, son, when can we start? So I started lifting weights with him. We were really looking forward to the season to start, which was going to be in 8 months later. But we began working on it and just building up his strength. And I began not just lifting weights with him, but teaching him the mindset. Okay, you need to dominate your area of the field. I mean, that's your spot. You need to own that piece of the field. And I was just trying to work his mind into understanding how to play and how to be victorious. So as the season came closer, and then finally it was the opening day, Brenda and I we sat down in the stands, and man, I could barely sit there. I'm just like on pins and needles. My son's first game. And, Brenda's nervous as can be. My son's going to get killed. And so we see the bus arrive from the other team, and they all start getting off the bus. And Brenda's like, oh no, look how big they are. So I look at them and say, that's an optical illusion. They're far away. They just look big. They got their pads on. She said, no, you need to go over there and look at them and let me know, are they big? So I go over there, and I'm just thinking it's an optical illusion. I get over there, and I step up next to this 8th grade kid who was as tall as I was and as big as I was. And I just went, oh, man, she is right. And so his number was 99, and I kind of kept that in my head. And so I get back to the stands, and Brenda goes, look at that one kid at 99. He's really big. And I said, oh no, it's an optical illusion. They're just, they really weren't that big. I lied, I flat out lied. So, because I don't know what to say at that point. So anyway, kickoff comes. Michael is an offensive lineman. He lines up. Guess who steps up in front of him? 99. Okay. Guy's big as me. So I'm just like, well, okay. Put the binoculars up. Ball snapped. Then they hit each other like one of those Discovery Channel 2 grizzly bears, slow motion, and their skins flopping and all that. That's kind of how it looked like to me anyway. And, next play, same thing. And I saw all through the first quarter. I mean, it's just like this horrific war going on. About halfway through the second quarter, the other kid lost his will to win. Michael just finally outlasted him, and Michael owned him for the rest of the game. It was pretty cool. So I'm telling Michael, hot, you're hot. Second game, same thing. Third game, same thing. He's doing real well. Get to the fourth game. Michael would later tell me that when he looked into the face of the guy who he was playing against, he knew instantly it was going to be a long night because he had hair coming out of every hole in his helmet. Hair coming out his ear holes, hair here, and which meant that he had gone through puberty, and of course Michael hadn't. And it really was that way. I mean, that kid is like Bam Bam with a rock, bam, 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 bam. And he was, maybe one play, Michael would sort of make a play, and then the next two he'd just get wiped. And it was a really, really long half. And inside I'm just going, oh, my poor kid. He's playing against Jethro, the Beverly Hillbillies, and you're just, this is big, this is bad. Well, so at the end of the half, it's time to go in the locker room. Michael runs off the field, and he's going to get a drink of water, and he doesn't look up at me. And I knew he was hurting, and he was ashamed. And so he got to the water, took his drink, and he finally got the courage to look up at me. I knew what he was thinking. He's thinking, Dad has been telling me for all these months how to own my position, how to dominate. He's taught me how to block. He's lifted all these weights, and now I go out there and I can't do any of it. And so he's looking up at me, and he's wanting to know how I'm feeling. And how do you think I responded? You're my boy. My boy. You see, I'm not interested in how successful he is every moment of every day. I'm interested in his commitment to me, his commitment to the game, his commitment to his own decisions. And didn't matter that he stumbled. I was going to take him the next week and let's show him new stuff. And, we were going to move ahead. All right. You need to understand that's how fathers feel. Your Heavenly Father, when He looks at you and you stumble and you masturbate, He's not up there going, oh. He's up there like this. Come on. Tomorrow I'm going to teach you some things, and next time you're going to make it. And see, the thing you need to understand is that God understands all the stuff we understand. I understood that 8th grade's 8th grade. Shoot, when he's a senior, he's going to take Jethro and kill him. Okay? 9th grade's 9th grade, 10th grade's 10th grade. I don't care. It's a learning process. We'll see how he is when he's a senior. I understand that. God says in his word, you have to learn to control your body. He gets it. You see what I'm saying? He had a son live here. They know the pressure. You see that? And he's never going anywhere, guys. He's never going to throw up his hands and leave. I mean, my son gets thrown around. What, I'm going to throw up my hands and leave? Make him walk home? No, I'm a good father. I'm a good father. And our Heavenly Father is a perfect father. He's not going anywhere. So the first step in understanding how to have the connection that would drive away sexual sin, the first step is to understand who he is. He is a perfect father, and he wants connection. And it doesn't matter what mistakes you make, he's there. And he's going to pick you up and say, come on, we're going to hit the wall again, but we're going to win this. Because he loves you, he wants to complete the destiny that the two of you have together, and he's not leaving. And you cannot have a relationship with him if you don't understand who he is. You see? You have to understand who he is. And it's very important. I hope that story stays with you for the rest of your life, because that is how he always responds. He's always for you. There's more to having a relationship with the Father than that. I mean, he is who he is, but you have to be who you are, and you've got your responsibilities too in moving in towards him. He's not moving away, but a lot of times it's very useful to move in towards him. I mean, when I was living in those days and I was having those sexual sin issues and I'm up in my office late at night masturbating, I had to move away from the Vaseline jar and to move towards God. You see what I'm saying? And I had to learn to connect with him in ways I hadn't learned before. So obviously there's new things you need to learn, that you need to reach out. But it's very important for us to understand that that connection with him, a genuine connection with the Father, will drive out all kinds of desire for sexual sin and masturbation and porn. Now, I want to share with you the key things that the Lord showed me to get this second vulnerability defended and under control. The first thing he showed me was a prayer and a worship connection that I had never yet had with him. I didn't even believe in prayer, to be honest with you, when I was first a Christian. I just figured God is God, he does what he does, and whether I pray or not, he's going to do what he wants to do because he's the king. Why not? Okay? Stupid theology, but logical in its own weird way. And what I found is that that's false. And the way I would want to say it is this way. I was listening to the radio one day and Chuck Swindoll came on the radio. And this is what he said. He said, I never go to prayer without first going to worship. He said that since I had no idea what he's talking about, because the only thing I ever heard about was worship in church, so I didn't know what he was talking about. What do you mean? But he went on to say that he's singing, he's putting on cassettes, he's singing to the Lord, and then he said something else I didn't understand. I can't find the throne room until I first worship. So, I mean, I really can't find the throne room in prayer unless I go to worship first, because that draws me into the throne room. And I'm like, throne room? When I pray, I'm in my basement, I don't get it. I mean, I'm just being honest. I didn't understand a thing about what he was saying. But I did understand one thing, and that was this. He's just a man. He's a famous man, but he's just a man. And if he can do this, I can do this. Okay? And so I did it. I got a boombox, I put in cassettes of worship songs, and I went down into my basement. And what I would do is I would walk from one end of the basement to the other, and my hands like this, and I would sing those love songs directly to him, just one-on-one. And that was what I did. Now, I can't say that that was easy at first, because I was always afraid that my kids might run down the stairs and look around the corner and go, hee hee hee, look at Dad, he's being silly. Or maybe a neighbor would look into the window and they would say, what's this crazy loon up to this time? I mean, we know he's this wild Christian, whatever. So, I mean, there was a lot of self-consciousness at first when I first started doing this. And I was kind of feeling like, this is kind of weird a grown man walking back and forth singing into outer space. So I'm not trying to say that this is something that I found real easy at first. But the one thing I said was, look, God loves this when Charles Swindoll does this. And I know he has to love it when I do it. So even though I feel weird, God doesn't feel weird about this. So I just press through. That's a very key attitude. And the wildest thing happened about the fourth week. He showed up in a very manifested way. I didn't see him, but I felt him. And suddenly it felt like I was sitting in my Father's lap. And there I was, suddenly I was just crying and kind of laying my head back against his chest. And from that day to this day, there's never been a time I've gone to prayer where he has not shown up. And all I can tell you is, once that kind of intimacy develops in your heart with the Lord, it becomes very difficult to push into sexual sin, because the idea, you're so intimate with him, he feels like he's with you. And the idea of looking at porn while he's sitting here, it takes on a whole different, I mean, we all know God's everywhere, okay? But I mean, when you're feeling that kind of intimacy, it really feels funny. And it almost felt like adultery for me to look at another girl when my groom is sitting next to me. You see what I'm saying? And maybe you don't see what I'm saying. Maybe you need to experience that yourself. But what I really want you to know is that the Lord needs you to connect with him in worship one-on-one. Not just in church, not just with your wife. You need to connect with him one-on-one. There's a communication that goes on, and there is a change in the battlefield. Before that point, I was 85% pure, but I was struggling, figuring out how to get rid of the rest. From the time I started doing that, the rest, everything began to fade. And that put the final nails in the coffin of this thing, where I can say to you, honestly, yeah, I mean, it hasn't been there. And it's not that I can't sin, it's just that I don't. What kind of songs did I use? Romance songs, the songs that are first-person songs, where you're not using, sometimes we'll sing, "Our God is an awesome God." The word "our" is a third-person song, third-person word. Those have their place, but songs like "You are awesome," "You are beautiful to me," "You are everything." See, the word "you" changes what happens during the worship time. And so I would use songs that were second-person love songs, and I get as romantic as I want. And what happens is there's a change in every area of my life, especially in the area of sexual sin. Now, it doesn't necessarily happen the fourth week. I taught my daughter this. Came to the fourth week, and she was mad God hadn't showed up. Came to the sixth week, which is how it happened with my pastor. God didn't show up. It got to be 10 weeks, 12 weeks, and she was literally bawling. God must hate me, okay? It wasn't until the 14th week that he showed up. She one night sat down just broken, just started sobbing with all of her heart. And the Lord just whispered Psalm 45. She's like, oh, he is here. And she began to read through it. Somewhere around the 10th verse, it says this: "The king is enthralled with your worship." And, you know, she's been thinking this whole time he's not listening. And the verse is, "The king is enthralled with your worship. Leave your family and be mine." I mean, it was just like, oh, it was one of the most beautiful experiences. When she told me, I'm like, oh, my hair standing up on end. And, you know, it's always been good for her since then. It's not like he shows up every single time in the same way I'm describing it, but, I mean, there's no doubts anymore that he's listening. I mean, he's there. He's your father. He's there. Now, I want to just share a few more things with you about how you can take this process into other areas of your life and gain intimacy. I took this whole singing process into my marriage and my relationship with Brenda. For the longest time, we had the most terrible prayer life. It just stunk. I mean, she's so different from me. For every 5 words I speak, she speaks 50, and her prayers could be so long. And then she likes to lay down when she prays, and I hate that. You're being lazy. Get up. And so there's all these little things going on. But one thing I found out is that when I brought the music in, it changed all that junk where I have all these complaints about, well, you're not praying like you should, or she's thinking that about me. What we did is we would put that music in the middle of the floor. She would go to her corner and I would go to my corner. I know it doesn't sound like intimacy right now, but she would sing to the Lord until she felt connection. I would sing to the Lord till I felt connection. Then we would come together. And I know you're going to call me a liar, but literally those times together can be way more intense than sex. I mean, we're holding hands together in the middle of the room and we start praying and it is electric, okay? Because we're both in the throne room now, I guess. I don't even know how to explain it, but it's just electric. And I've got to say that all other thoughts like, oh, she's weird the way she prays, oh, she's praying too long. None of that even happens because you're just so focused and you're together, you're one. You see what I'm saying? And once you begin to do this in your own individual prayer time and then you take it into your marriage, you're going to see a new intimacy in your marriage that you haven't seen before. And that also is going to drive off false intimacy. You take this into the life with your kids. I remember I was thinking, I think Michael was 14. I thought, I need to really make sure he understands how to pray. I've prayed with him a billion times, but I just really need to begin teaching him how to really go after God. And so I said, okay, son, we're going to sing together. Now, when you tell a 14-year-old boy that he has to sing with his dad, just 2 of them in one room, it's daunting, okay. He wasn't sure how that was going to go, but I turned on the music, I began singing, he began singing, and then we came together and I laid him on the bed, and then I laid kind of like a T, perpendicular, my chest on his back, and I just spread my arms out and I began to pray for him. The impact on him was dramatic. We did that for just a couple of weeks. And do you know that I'll bet over the last 8 years, he probably has missed having his own prayer time with God maybe 5 times in an entire 8 years. He never misses because he had that great experience with his dad, had this deep understanding of the value of it, and he worships one-on-one and he prays like that sometimes twice a day. And I just want you to know that you can have that kind of an impact. And, I've told you some stories about me and my son. We are really, really close as a result of that because we can sing together, we can worship together, we can talk together. It's just a complete, he's as much a best friend as anyone. And and you can imagine, we've talked about it before, when you have that kind of intimacy, my son and I, I don't want to get into sexual sin and have to tell him. He doesn't want to get into sexual sin and have to tell me. We're just going to be rocks and stand. We're warriors together, and we ain't fallen because we have a family destiny. Our family destiny is to change the meaning of the Stoeker name, and he's part of that. And he knows that all of us, Jason, me, him, we're in this thing to the end, and we're not failing. We've got all the power we need. We already know that. So it's just a matter of us deciding whether we follow or not. And so far, so good. But you see, that kind of intimacy keeps someone from falling off and slipping off down some slippery slope. I don't want my son going there. I don't want to go there. Now, one last thing. When you are looking for genuine intimacy in your life, by the time we're this age, we're not on football teams and we're not in youth groups, and it's a little bit different. It's really important for you to connect with the other guys in the church. There's a story of a church called River Valley Church up in the Minneapolis area, and as far as I have ever seen, it's probably the healthiest church I've ever seen in my life. The place is an incredible place. And I was talking to the pastor one day, how in the world did this happen? And he said, it's funny, it had to do with your topic. He said, I was always trying to get my guys unified, always trying to get them to volunteer for things, always trying to get them to lead. And he said, I could never get anybody to lead. And, I knew these guys were committed. They were tithing. Okay, so nobody tithes to a place they're not committed to, and I could tell that. Whenever I asked them to do anything that would entail power tools, they were really quick to do that. Okay, it's anything that they knew they were good at, but anything else, Sunday school, missions trips, whatever, he just couldn't get them to do it. And he finally figured it out. He had been praying about it, finally figured it out. He thought, I'll bet these guys are self-disqualifying themselves from, volunteering. And he began to talk to a few of them, and he began to find out that because of their sexual sin, in their own minds, they didn't feel worthy to lead. They didn't feel worthy to go on a missions trip because, shoot, I'm going to be the pervert there. I'm going to hurt the spiritual advancement. I can't be going there. All right. And so what happened was they were all self-disqualifying themselves. And that's very common in churches these days. You'll see, you go anywhere, any churches, and all the women are in leadership and the men are sitting back. And so what he said was, he just decided, I'm going to be real open about this. So he got 7 guys. He was the 8th one. And they began going through my book, Every Man's Battle. And his intent was to train 7 guys and give them each a group. And what happened was that group got trained. They began having their own groups. And now they've got like 50 of these groups going on at all times. I think they got 5,000 people now. At the time, he could not get his church to grow. From the time they started getting together where the men were connecting in genuine intimacy on this topic, the church exploded. He will tell you that's the reason, is that men started to get pure. And they stopped disqualifying themselves. I may not be perfectly pure, but I'm moving that way. I'm now qualified to lead. They started stepping into roles. And the thing about that church is not only did they then step into roles and the men begin to lead, when I walk into that church, it's very different than a lot of churches I go to. Most churches I go to, guys kind of come up to me and they're kind of leaning back, like, or Fred might be able to see into my life and see that, I've been masturbating. Listen, guys, I cannot see that, all right? So I go, but I go there and their chins are up, chests are out, and they're not afraid to come up and talk to me at all. Hey, brother, you're a peer, I'm a peer. They're not scared because they've engaged the battle and they're moving in the right direction. And the healthiness of that is tremendous. I remember my son got up to speak, Jason, because he had co-written a book with me. And all they did was hear that he had gone to his wedding altar without kissing and had never left a girl worse off for having known him. He steps up into the pulpit. He hadn't even said anything yet. They gave him a 10-minute standing ovation just because they wanted to clap for his life. You have to be in a weird place, an unusual place, where the men give you a 10-minute standing ovation because you didn't kiss a girl. That's the kind of healthy place it is. And what I would say to any church is that, first of all, you as individuals, if you want to be free of sexual sin, you need the connection, the genuine connection that kind of men's group and that kinds of joint warring can do for you and your connection with people. And the second thing is, as a church, you need that so that the men get up and do what they're called to do. And you essentially double the leadership in your church. The women are already leading. The men need to get up and do what they're supposed to do. And then you have a situation where everything is healthy and the men aren't averting their eyes every time they walk up to another man. And they're not averting their eyes just thinking, oh, I ain't no good. Okay? They're ready to go. They're ready to fight. And they're ready to stand and say, I belong in this world of men. Shoulder to shoulder, I fit. Okay, I am not some doofus. I belong here, and I have what it takes.